Come on in, friend. Welcome back. Hey, what a better way to celebrate Holy Saturday than a night at my holy abode. Not that it's so holy in the traditional sense, I mean. Just that there are a few holes here and there I have to patch up. I'll get to it eventually, Chester. Geez, what are you, my wife now? I'm single for a reason, you scaly prick. Anyway, come on in, friend. Clarence is all pumped up for the story tonight. I'm happy the ghostly prick is enjoying the show these days. I just wish I could see where he is. I could be sitting in his lap for all I know. Creepy. Ooh, it's the Crimson Hour here at the Weekend Abode, so we better get started. How's when that last leg of life fades away? It's gonna be you, me, chasing like my mouth and go. Our tale tonight is brought to you by author Frederick Pangbourne. Frederick has sadly passed on, but he's left a great body of horror in his wake, and we mean to keep his legacy alive. So without further delay, from our old pal Frederick Pangbourne, I give you Infernal Entry. Philip Reed pulled the unmarked car up to the curb in front of the Lumen house. 2 patrol cars were already on the scene upon his arrival, their overhead lights flashing reds and blues boldly against the night. As he emerged from his vehicle, with a styrofoam cup of takeout coffee in one hand, he took notice of 2 officers standing near one of the patrol cars talking. The back door to the car was ajar, and he would make out the back of someone's head seated in the back seat. As he strolled along the road and approached the scene, he turned his gaze to 2 more officers standing on the dimly lit, full-width front porch of the house, also engaged in conversation. The square 2.5-story home was of an American 4-square architecture. Though the house was shrouded in a gloom of veiled evening shadows, he could see from the front porch light the house was white. Only a few houses in town were as aged and outdated as this one, and the ones that still remained seemed to reside only on the furthest outskirts of the town's swelling modernization. They, as this one in particular, were usually found nestled away in the densely wooded lands yet untouched by the town's growing expanse. One officer near the patrol car caught notice of Reed as he approached and broke off his talk and turned to greet him. "Glad you could join us, Detective. We only called you like an hour ago," he said sarcastically and smiled. "Go fuck yourself, Jasicki. It's 2 a.m. I was knocked out when the call came in," Reed replied. "Aren't you supposed to be on vacation, Reed?" the other officer added. Reed paused once he reached the rear of the car and took a deep swig from his coffee before answering. "That's in 3 more days, and just so you all know, I will not be answering my phone that week. I don't care if that Michael Myers guy from those Halloween movies is on the loose. Don't call me." Both officers chuckled, and Jasicki stepped closer and led Reed away from the patrol car so their words could not be heard. "So what have we got?" The call mentioned something about a missing person, possibly a homicide, asked Reed before hitting the coffee cup again. "Yeah, the station got a call just after 1 a.m. from the woman in the back seat, a Mrs. Francine Crenshaw. She was in hysterics when she called, so dispatch couldn't get an accurate story. Apparently, she was ranting on about her husband." Jasicki paused and pulled out a small memo pad and opened it. Glenn Crenshaw was missing. She actually used the word taken. When we got here, she was crumpled up on the front lawn in tears. When we questioned her, she pretty much told us the same thing. Which was that something had taken her husband and that he was dead. Something? Look, Reed, I'm just telling you what she told us. I assume you guys searched the house? Of course. There was nothing except some blood splattering in the cellar. Or at least it looks like blood. And an ear. We figured we'd call you first to talk to her before we called in forensics." "An ear, you said?" "Yeah. With that and all the blood, we chalked it up to a possible homicide." Reed sighed deeply as he pictured a severed ear lying in blood, then gestured to the patrol car. Okay, thanks. How is she now? A lot calmer than she was. Okay, give me a few minutes. I want to talk to her. Have them do another sweep of the house and let me know if they find anything else of interest. Tell them not to touch anything, please. Sure thing. As Jasicki moved toward the house and called the officers from the porch, Reed walked to the open door of the patrol car. Stooping, he peered into the back seat. The woman was somewhere in her mid-30s, he surmised, with light brown shoulder-length hair and almond-colored eyes that displayed streaks of mascara that ran down her cheeks. She was dressed in a dark blue nightgown. Mrs. Crenshaw? The woman did not initially answer him. Instead, she stared blankly at the car's windshield. It was not until he addressed her a second time that she became aware of his presence. She turned to face him.
Yes?
My name is Detective Reed, and I was wondering if I could talk to you for a moment and ask you a few questions about what happened here. Though she still retained the lost, distant stare, she slowly nodded. Thank you. He motioned to the edge of the back seat. Do you mind? She shook her head and slid over closer to the driver's side door, allowing Reed to sit partially in the vehicle. His one leg hung out of the open door. Reaching into his brown overcoat, he produced a pen and a small memo pad similar to Jasicki's. Okay, so I was told that you said to one of the officers that your husband, Glenn Crenshaw, was taken and assumed dead. Is that true?
Yes,
she replied softly, nodding. Who took him?
He should never have gone down there. He knew better.
Excuse me? Where? The cellar? She nodded again. Why's that? Was someone in the cellar waiting for him? Silence was her only reply as she resumed her stare at the windshield. Mrs. Crenshaw, I know you've been through a lot this evening, but I need you to tell me what you know. If I'm going to help you, I need you to talk to me. What happened? Who was in the cellar? Crenshaw sniffled and wiped her hand over her cheeks, smearing the already running mascara.
I guess if I'm going to tell you everything I know, I should probably start at the very beginning.
If you feel it's necessary, then yes, please do.
We were married in the spring of '82. The house had been in Glenn's family for generations. I was told that his great-grandfather had the house built after he acquired the lot. Glenn's great-grandparents were very religious from what I'd gathered. His great-grandfather worked at a lumber yard and was a minister at the local church in his spare time. It wasn't until we had eventually taken our turn in line to live in the old house and call it our own that I discovered the door in the cellar. Like any woman who had just been given a large house, I was eager to explore every nook and cranny of the place. There had always been some unseen, ominous vibe emitting from that cellar. Even Glenn eventually and reluctantly admitted to the sensation one felt when they went beneath the house. Your skin would suddenly break out in goosebumps, and the hair on your neck would become erect. It was as if a strong, unknown resonance was being put out, like a warning. I felt it the first time I stood under the house. Anyway, despite the creepy feeling, I wanted to turn a section of the basement into a wine cellar. I had found the perfect alcove down there. The problem was, it was filled with heavy wooden crates. I mentioned it to Glenn on several occasions, but he dragged his feet on their removal, not being overly concerned about my request. I attempted to move them myself, but the task was beyond my physical prowess. So one day while he was away at work, I took it upon myself and hired some movers to come over and haul the crates out and store them in the garage. I figured I'd surprise him when he got home. I could tell by the expressions on the movers' faces as they emerged from the basement that they too were not immune to the cellar's foreboding energy. It was not until I had paid them and the last of them were hastily departing that one of them mentioned the door.
I don't know if you're aware of it, lady, But there was a strange door behind those crates. Freaky-looking thing.
Those were his exact words. Freaky-looking thing. Well, despite my own personal feelings about being in the cellar, especially while being alone in the house, I ventured down there to see this freaky-looking door for myself. Once I stood in front of it, I had to admit that freaky was exactly what it was. Hidden behind the stacked crates was indeed a door. A heavy wooden door, with iron reinforcements and no apparent locking mechanism. Only a handle to pull it open. Though a hidden door was relatively odd, it was not its initial appearance that gave it its freakish oddity. Embedded in the very wood of the door was a large ornate silver cross. My first reaction was to touch it, but the dreadful sensation that lingered there seemed even more powerful now that the crates had been removed. It was as if the door itself was sending forth this steady, alarming surge of fear, and by removing the crates, it was like tearing down a barrier that shielded the true intensity of the power. I abandoned my curiosity of the door at that point. The sensation was too overwhelming and retreated up the stairs. I waited for Glenn to return from work. When he returned later that evening, I told him of my course of action regarding the crates and of the door. He seemed annoyed at what I had done and asked if I had touched or opened the door. I told him that I had wanted to, but lacked the courage to even touch it. At this, he appeared relieved. When I questioned him about the door, he sat me down in the living room and confessed to knowing of its presence for many years. He said that when the town was nothing more than a growing settlement and the sight of the first automobiles were a rarity, they had discovered something on the plot of land which this house now rests on. Though the variations of the story had differed slightly as it was passed down the Crenshaw bloodline, it basically states that a pit had been discovered on the outskirts of the town deep in the woods. A seeming bottomless pit that some said they could hear faint screams of agony rising from its blackened depths if one listened carefully enough. When the discovery of this infamous pit circulated through enough of the townspeople, a group, including the late Pastor Crenshaw, went into the woods to investigate the mentioned pit. Immediately upon their arrival, the same powerful vibrations that are currently in the cellar were still being emitted then and undoubtedly felt. It had only taken the frightened group to hear the hellish wails of torment from somewhere deep below for them to quickly realize that what they had stumbled on was no mere sinkhole, but a portal into hell itself. Now, if these howls of the damned were real, who can really say? All those who attended the scene that day are now long dead and buried. But whatever had occurred was enough for them to take immediate and drastic actions. Being one of the few pastors in town, Glenn's great-grandfather volunteered to seal the unholy gateway, in the only way that seemed feasible at the time. The pit was not some wide chasm, but had a diameter of perhaps only 12 feet, and since its endless depth would be impossible to feel, it was determined that a protective structure would be built over the hole to conceal it and prevent any evil from emerging from its bowels. And as you can probably guess by now, this house was that structure. Besides a church, which the town already had, what better preventative measure could be used besides a house belonging to a servant of God? So a frightful town gathered its available resources, and Pastor Edward James Crenshaw soon had a home built for his residency, right over the bottomless pit where he would act as its holy sentinel. A well-fortified, heavy stone foundation was constructed. They built an equally strong room surrounding the hole. Now, why they felt the need to put a door to this room and not just seal it off completely is beyond me. Perhaps they wanted a means to periodically inspect the pit for any changes. No one truly knows why a door was added, and when I asked Glenn, he simply stated that his great-grandfather had declined to share that information with anyone, taking his unknown reason to his grave. Nevertheless, a door without a lock existed, and the blessed silver cross embedded into its face was left behind. The crates had most likely been piled up to both conceal the door from prying eyes and assist in the reinforcing of it from ever being opened on either end. And since that day, hundreds of years ago, the door has remained hidden from human eyes. Until recently, that is. Once Glenn had relayed the same tale that had been handed down to each new generation, I have to admit that I was taken aback. I knew that there was something unpleasant about the cellar, but I would never in 100 years guess that some infernal entry point was the cause. I mean, who in their right mind would believe such a thing? I know I didn't at first. But that night after I was told the story, I laid awake in bed trying to prove the account wrong, but despite all my mental deciphering, I could not prove it false. It all made sense. Regardless of how insane it sounded, it all made perfect sense to what was occurring beneath the house. The next morning, Glenn and I decided it would be in our best interest to have the crates moved back into the cellar. The very thought of what possibly lay beyond that door and having no means of keeping it secured was very frightening the more we thought about it. I contacted the moving company and explained about having the crates placed back in the basement, but they would not be free until the following week. I was discouraged. There was nothing we could do but hope that nothing out of the normal happened until then. In the meantime, Glenn installed a deadbolt on the cellar door to provide us with some sense of security, even though we both knew it was a false sense. We vowed to not enter the basement unless it was absolutely necessary. A few days had passed since the installment of the deadbolt, and one Saturday afternoon after returning from grocery shopping in town, I walked down the hall to the kitchen and saw that the cellar door was wide open. Our cellar door is situated beneath the space under the staircase. The sight of the open door damn near caused me to drop the grocery bags I was carrying. I called out for Glenn, but there was no answer, and I knew he was home. So against my better judgment, I went into the basement when I should have been re-securing the door instead. That was when I found him. Standing only a few feet from the portal with his hand reaching out for the door's handle. I shouted his name, and he flinched as if I had awakened him from some trance. I asked him what he was doing and why he was even down in the cellar. You know what he told me? He said he could hear someone knocking at the door from the other side. Something had drawn him into the cellar, and that's when he heard the knocking. He seemed as if he were in a daze as he spoke, like he had been sleepwalking or something. So I moved toward him and guided him away from the door. He stated he heard knocking coming from the other side of the door, but I heard nothing while I was down there. As I led him back upstairs, he said something that sent a chill up my spine.
They can't pass through unless you open the door or invite them in.
Once I had him back upstairs, I closed and rebolted the door. Though he was fine hours later, he couldn't recall being in the basement. Yet over the next couple of days, I would find him making his way down the cellar steps or attempting to unlock and open the basement door. It was as if some unheard siren's call was luring him down there to open the door. I found myself watching him like a hawk after his third attempt to go down there. He would be fine one moment and suddenly slip into that trance-like state without warning and start making his way to the door.
Can't you hear it? The knocking. Can't you hear it, Franny? Someone is at the door.
During these bizarre episodes, I never heard a sound from the basement. Whatever lurked behind the door was focusing its energy on Glenn. Maybe whatever it was knew that someone had removed the crates, and all it needed now was just the right person to crack the door open for it. Yesterday, we had spent the day in town at the farmer's market. When we came home, we had a dinner over a couple of glasses of wine, and it seemed as if everything had gone back to normal. The movers would be here in a couple of days, and the crates would soon be back in their rightful places again. I could then let down my guard with Glenn's wanderings, and we could get our life back on track. We even discussed over dinner about selling the house, having the entire section of the basement bricked up, then putting it on the market. The idea about living over and opening to, well, was just too stressful, even if the story was perhaps false. We both had experienced enough for us to mutually decide to move on to greener and safer pastures. After we had gone to bed early that night, I woke a few hours later to use the bathroom, and that was when I noticed that Glenn's side of the bed was empty. There was no second thought to where he was, and I rushed from the bed and went downstairs. My worst fears had come true when I saw the basement door open again and the light on to the cellar. I shouted out his name as I hastened down the stairs, and as I landed on the cellar floor, I had but the briefest of moments to see it. The infamous door was slightly ajar and was slowly closing. When it closed, I scanned the basement and found a puddle of fresh blood where Glenn had stood. It was when I saw his ear lying on the floor that I ran back upstairs and called the police. Whatever he led into the cellar had finally claimed what it wanted and crept silently back beyond the door, even closing it in its departure. The next thing I knew, I was on the front lawn and the police were helping me up.
Reed stared at his memo pad for a moment, then gave a heavy sigh before closing it and returning it into his overcoat pocket. That is... He scratched the top of his head as her story was still sinking in. One hell of a story, Mrs. Crenshaw. Sounds like something from a Stephen King book.
You don't believe a word I just said, do you?
She turned her gaze from the windshield and directed it toward him. I mean, I believe that something terrible happened to your husband, but doorways to hell and the devil knocking to come out? I mean...
I never said it was the devil, did I? I said I didn't see anything except the door closing again.
Her face was a mixture of frustration and anguish. She was on the brink of crying. I'm just saying, what would you do if I told you that same story, huh?
I would go into the basement and look for myself, detective.
Her voice hardening.
That's what I would do.
Again, Reed gave a heavy sigh before climbing out of the car and making his way to Jasicki, who was standing on the lawn speaking with the three other officers. They had obviously finished going over the house while he was still in the car listening to Mrs. Crenshaw. Anything? Nothing that wasn't there before. Okay. I'm going to go inside and take a quick look around. Get forensics a call in 10 minutes and keep an eye on her. He jutted his chin at the patrol car with Mrs. Crenshaw in it. Whatever happened, I think she blew a fuse upstairs. What did she say? Reed scoffed and forced a chuckle. Something about the devil living in the cellar. She says that's who took her husband. Sweet Jesus! Jasicki laughed. Just when you thought you've heard 'em all. Okay, we got her. 10 minutes, right? Yeah, call them in 10. Thanks. And with that, Reed turned away with a wave and made his way across the front lawn to the porch. Crossing over the threshold to the front door, he found himself in a spacious reception foyer with a set of stairs on his left. He recalled Crenshaw saying that the cellar door was beneath the stairs, and he made his way there. The cellar door was as she had said. A new stainless steel deadbolt had been recently installed on the outside of the door. The lights to the basement were still on, but he paused at the top of the stairs, looking at the steps leading down. He wasn't quite sure, but he was feeling something peculiar. A strange sensation was beginning to wash over him, and he lifted his hand. The fine hairs on the back of his hand were erect. He scoffed. His subconscious had taken the woman's foolish recital into account. He forced a half laugh at the ridiculous story and descended the stairs. The wood stairs creaked under his weight as he went lower. The cellar was basically bare of any objects, and it took him no time to spot both the blood and the door. Stepping off the last step and onto the basement cement floor, he cautiously moved toward the puddle of splattered blood. The blood was congealing in a large puddle several feet from the door, with smaller splashes decorating the surrounding area. In the puddle, he spotted the severed ear. Kneeling, he examined the floor. Faint traces for blood were streaked in the direction of the door, as if someone were dragged. "Someone attacked you where you stood, and then dragged you to the..." he whispered to himself as he looked up to the door in question. The door was also as she had described, a heavy wooden door of old craftsmanship, with a large silver ornate cross embedded into it. Reed stood and surveyed the door. Again he sighed as the logical part of him told him to open the door, but his primitive animalistic senses cried out a dire warning. The sensation he felt at the top of the stairs seemed to intensify. He could feel his flesh succumbing to goosebumps, and a chill was working its way up his spine. Reed forced another half-laugh at his own surmounting fear. He swallowed hard and was about to step forward when a knocking came from the other side of the door. 3 audible raps. Then nothing. "Who's there?" he asked in a voice that lacked any genuine conviction. The 3 knocks came again in answer. Then nothing. "I said, who's there?" He felt his hand reaching for his sidearm. "This is the police. I suggest you come out and show yourself." Even as the words were being expelled from his lips, his thoughts were replaying what Mrs. Crenshaw had told him that her husband had told her. They can't pass through unless you open the door or invite them in. He was preparing to repeat himself when a detectable creaking sound started. The door was now, ever so slowly, being pushed open. His lips quivered as the ominous sensation was becoming overwhelming, causing him to surrender to a state of petrified fear. The door was opening wider, and as it continued, 4 fingers slid from behind the door and gripped its edge. The skin color of the fingers was a deep red, and the fingernails black and pointed. Reed felt his bladder on the verge of releasing, and was unaware of the string of saliva that was seeping from the corner of his mouth. The door was now fully open, as a sight beyond his most frightening nightmares stepped through and into the cellar. It was only then that Reed could scream. And that was Infernal Entry by author Frederick Pangbourne. A good reminder to consider the doors getting knocked on before you open it. Front door? Might be Girl Scouts. Inexplicable door in the basement? Usually not Girl Scouts. Unless you happen to keep them down there, you sicko. Thanks, Clarence. I'll be here all weekend. A little about the author. Frederick Pangbourne was a short story author with over 100 stories to his credit, and the majority of them in publication. He was a retired law enforcement officer and a former U.S. Marine. And again, a special thanks to his brother Robert Pangbourne, who's partnered with us to keep Frederick's legacy alive. Robert himself is an amazing artist who we insist that you go check out. You can find him on Facebook as R.F. Pangbourne. That's simply spelled Pangborn. Check out the show notes for a link to his Instagram. His paintings are fucking horrifying. Hey, thanks, Robert, and thanks, Fred. Gone but not forgotten. The Crimson Hour is a production of the Sinister Somnolence Network. All narration and audio production by yours truly. Co-produced by Geoff Sturtevant. You can follow me on Facebook for news and upcoming releases on both this show and Drew Blood's Dark Tales, my Friday night show on Chillin' Tales for Dark Nights. I hope to see you there too. But hey, while we're here, please hit all those obligatory buttons and share if you don't mind. We'd really appreciate it. The Crimson Hour is accepting submissions. If you've got a story or two you'd like to be featured on this show, send it to drewbloodhorror@gmail.com. If selected, you'll get the full treatment. Well, the Crimson Hour's over, and you know what that means. Things are about to get pretty dark around here. So thanks as always for joining me tonight, friends. Remember, if you'd be so kind as to add a review to Apple Podcasts, I'll make sure to shout you out on the show. Of course, simple ratings are also appreciated. And if you happen to be here on YouTube, feel free to hit the like button and say hi below. I read all the comments and I appreciate them. And with that, safe travels, friend. I'll see you all next time at the Crimson Hour.